Welcome back to the Sporting Mates podcast. I'm your co-host, Brody. With me, as always, is the good man, the man with the facts about the stats, Juri. How are you today, mate?
Great, Brody, and fantastic to be on with you as always for another week. And the home and away season's done and dusted. It was arguably one of the most tensest ever that we've seen, and finals is another week away, and we're really trying to just dissect what's going to happen next, and because it's extremely unpredictable.
It's good, and you can't even get excited about this weekend's games because we've got that bye now. And I don't know about you, but I'm feeling a little bit lost this week. I don't really know what I'm going to do this weekend.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of sort of hunger, isn't it, just to see the finals. Well, of course, there's the Waffle finals on, so that's good as well, with East Perth and Claremont and Subiaco and Peel Thunder doing battle. Of course, East Fremantle having the bye this week because they finished on top of the ladder. So that's a good thing as well, having the Waffle on board too. And I think Samford and the VFL finals, I think, also running concurrently on the same week. So still plenty of footy to really immerse ourselves into, and also probably a bit of flashbacks as well, maybe even reviewing back on the season too for some that love to watch some of the games and the highlights of the respective rounds. So still a lot to keep us occupied, Brody.
And a fair few Mad Monday costumes getting around as well. Plenty of stuff going on in local footy. My local footy team's through to the grand final, the prelim final. My wife's netball side's through to the prelim final. So we're still a little bit up in the bout for at least a couple more weeks. But we'll get into Friday night's game, and it was Collingwood 101 defeating Essendon 31. Once again, it was just a pathetic performance by Essendon. And if I was a Bombers fan, I would be tearing my hair out about now.
I think it undoes a lot of the hard work that they did in the first 17 rounds of this season, Brody, just to see how it all unravelled, especially in this last fortnight, losing by a combined 196 points out of the top of my head.
Yeah.
So that's extremely disappointing. And we spoke last week about how Brad Scott's comments after that Geelong game, which were cause for concern, but then those concerns just ultimately turned into big, loud red alarm bells when you lose your final two games by huge margins. And I think, again, to go into this season, well, the off-season, shall I say, is how do I address certain areas? Because Darcy Parish hasn't signed yet what is a pretty big deal that is onto him on the table. And if he doesn't re-sign, then think most likely he's going to be heading back home to Geelong because that's where he's from and that's where he played his footy before he was drafted by Essendon back in 2015 with the Geelong Falcons in the TAC Cup.
Yeah.
The other part to it as well is the backline and finding another reliable, tall defender. Brandon Zerk-Thatcher really had arguably a career best season, but they need someone else with just that little bit of extra physicality and bulk and able to hold their ground when it comes to one-on-one contests. They're able to physically match it. So those are a couple of areas for the Bombers heading into this off-season. And to be honest as well, just trying to get that synergy with Peter Wright and Sam Wiedemann, because Scott was highly defending of Wiedemann too. Remember, I think there was a particular game where he came to Wiedemann's defence and said he's doing all the other small intangibles, of course, that aren't him impacting his scoreboard, but are still going a long way to us winning. And that sort of fell apart, and Wiedemann sort of, should I say, fell out of favour in that regard. Yeah. So there are numerous issues I think that the Bombers have to address during this off-season, and unfortunately it's another season where they aren't going to be in the finals and haven't, of course, won a final since 2004, that game against Melbourne in the elimination final. Heaps of issues again to address, and it's really disappointing just to see the effort alone, particularly in that first half against Collingwood, when he only kicked 2 goals in the opening half. Collingwood kicks, the first 9-10 goals of the game, and thought at that point they're going to lose by 20 or 21 goals.
Just on Brendan Zerk-Thatcher, you mentioned him before. I think I liken him, when I look at him and the way he plays, much alike to a young Jake Lever, where being the number one key defender isn't his role. I think his best role would be that second or third key defender who can then bounce off and then he can intercept that ball. And he's not quite built for it. You saw him get monstered last week as well. And I think his role, he's going to play his best football as that. If they can get another one in, I don't know, say like an Asava Radigalia, for example. I know that they're not going to get him, or a Harry Mackay would be crucial. And then I think you could see Brandon Zerk-Thatcher, even compete for like an All-Australian squad. Maybe not the team, but you saw what happened when Jack Lever, when he was there for the Crows doing that, and now you see what he's doing for Melbourne when he's got Stephen May taking the number one key defender, and he just comes off his man and then plays that kind of role. And I think just looking at the way Zerk-Thatcher plays, I think that's exactly what Essendon need to do.
I think, too, with getting Radically, if they can, or Ben Mackay's the other one, because most likely he's going to be heading out the doors of Arden Street.
He's already gone, mate.
To basically solidify what the Bombers need in that big extra tall defender to accommodate Zerk-Thatcher, to accommodate Mason Redmond, to accommodate Jordan Ridley, because it's already a solid back six, but what they need to address anyway is that big, tall defender that can take on the opposition's best key forward. So in the likes of a Charlie Curnow or Taylor Walker, etc., etc.,
yep.
and Joe Danaher, just a number of those other really
the physical beasts,
key forwards. Yes, the physical beasts that look to use their strength to an advantage, but also their skills at ground level too. They're not just great aerial marks, but they also impact when the ball hits the ground. And I think, too, he may not be the full 100% solution, I think, Ben Mackay, but it will go some way to addressing the need that Essendon requires.
Sometimes you have to pay extra just to fill a hole in your side, and we've seen that over the years. Sometimes you play overs for a player, but if they fill a hole in your side, then they're worth their money. And it was good to see Jordan Agoe just looking really ominous for a huge final series. Love the way he burst out from a stoppage. Come to think of it, 3 or 4 years ago, he couldn't play more than 4 or 5 minutes in the midfield without getting gassed. He's worked on himself, he's worked on his body, and it's great for not only Collingwood fans, but I think AFL fans to see Jordan Agoe 100% and up and firing.
That is extremely 100% correct, Brody. And going into, I think early on in his career, we all thought he was going to play us at forward. I think he 48 goals in that 2018 year, which Collingwood made the grand final, and I think just from there he was going to solidify a spot as a forward. But I think there was always something within Jordan Agoe that he was going to make the transition from a forward into a midfielder, because he already had the physical attributes there. His disposal by foot is extremely lethal, and you marinate those elements together and it combines well for what Collingwood were looking ahead in terms of having another extremely dangerous midfielder who's not only able to impact within the congestion, but also able to impact with his outside running, his endurance, and he's made massive strides in improving his aerobic capacity, as you touched on, Brody, where he couldn't spend more than 4 to 5 minutes playing in the midfield before he'd ultimately get gassed or had to move forward or had to quickly take a 5-minute breathe on the bench. And that's, again, a full testament to what he's undergone in the last couple of pre-seasons to get himself in absolute tip-top shape and to be able to cover more than 10 Ks in the midfield. And it helps significantly what Collingwood have already done with their midfield over the last 3 to 4 seasons by building this next wave of nucleus, because, again, Scott Pendlebury, how long he's there, well, he could easily be there for another 3 seasons. He hardly
gets injured. I was going to say 30, mate, because I wouldn't doubt it. Still running around as a 50-year-old.
He is. He's 35. He most likely played another 3 to 4 seasons, Brody. The only significant injury he had was back in 2012 when I think he hurt his knee and missed about, I think it was 7 to 8 weeks with a cracked, I think it was a cracked tibia or something like that, where he clashed knees with one of the Gold Coast players, and that was back in 2012. And I can't remember any other significant injuries that Pendle's had. But it is a real strength that he's been able to build on too. And I think one more thing before we do move on from the topic, Brody, is he dedicated himself to having an enormous pre-season after what happened last year and to put himself under a strenuous amount of physical pressure to get the best out of his body. And it's paid dividends in some of the games that he's had this season. And he hasn't had moments where he's drifted out of a game for a quarter or two and leaving Collingwood supporters probably pondering over, well, where's he been for a certain period of time when we needed him most? They can always now rely upon him to deliver. And I think, again, the final stages set for him to really display what is already the superstardom that he has.
Yeah, and we'll move on to the next game, mate. Fremantle 93 defeating Hawthorn 56. Caleb Sarong once again just led the way for the Dockers. It's nice to see him line up against his younger brother Jai there as well. But one guy I want to touch on from this game, coming from Sturt in the Sandful, Tom Emmett. He's overcome more in his 21-year-old career than what most people, I suppose, have to go through in their lifetime. And he's overcome cancer, a serious Achilles injury, got picked up as a mature age recruit from the Sandful, and now he's playing in his second game. He looks like he's probably in the top 5 in their players. Just, I love watching not only him, but stories like this where you see young kids, just because they don't get picked up as a 17 or 18-year-old, they go back to their waffles, their Sandfuls, their VFLs. They play good footy. Jai Newcombe, for example, and look what he's doing now. They don't give up. They get picked up, and then these guys here become future leaders of your club.
100% spot on, Brody, with that. And it doesn't now, I think the prerequisite doesn't require people who are aspiring to become AFL footballers to be drafted as an 18-year-old. And there are a number of other examples I can give to you, which includes Carl Hardingham. He was overlooked in 4 drafts before being selected in 2009. Alex Chincotta is the most recent one, right? Yep. He basically got overlooked right from his drafting in 2014, and there was that COVID year where he was rehabbing his ACL and still doing all the strenuous training methods to make sure that he give himself every possible opportunity of being picked up by an AFL club. And there's also another one too, which I
James
think is
Podsiadly was the marking coach, and then ended up getting a game for him.
He was 26 or 28, I'm pretty sure, when he was drafted.
Was.
It's incredible.
40.
It's incredible, right, just to see players who don't give up on their dreams and to keep persisting no matter how big the odds are against them. And it's a full credit not only to themselves but also to the teams that they're part of and the coaching staff that have full faith behind them, because it's pretty easy to succumb and give up when the results aren't going your way. But the true character testifies whether a player can get up from so many hits and keep going, and that's where the full kudos is to what Tom Emmett, as you mentioned, Brody, has done. And it's only been a couple of games, but it's almost as though he's cemented himself in Fremantle's best 22 going into next season, because he provides that extra zip of tackling pressure. He's basically a medium-sized forward at 186 centimetres.
Hybrid, can play tall or small.
Yeah. So that's the elements I think Fremantle haven't had for quite a fair while, and I think the closest comparison I can think of is Chris May.
Yeah, I was going to mention him. Yeah, just there as well. So I think this one, all eyes was on Finn McGuinness. Is he going to go to Caleb Sarong or Andrew Brayshaw? I turned on the first quarter. He's gone to Luke Ryan. What's going on here?
I think he does everything. It's almost like the octopus's tentacles, Brody. He just goes to one player for 15 minutes. Nope. Coach switch from Sam Mitchell, go to the next player, Caleb Sarong, go to the next player, Andy Brayshaw. And I have to look at the last month, Brody, and the whole chart on what he's done tagging opposition players. And for a 20 to 25 minute period, they only have 1 or 2 touches. And it's because of the McGuinness impact that he has. And he always seems to pay very close attention and doesn't give up much room. And he knows the nuances on how to get under the skin and quell players' impacts for that certain period of time. And it does go a long way. And that first quarter, I think Luke Ryan only had about 3 or 4 disposals before I think Coach Sam Mitchell let go of that tagging leash and moved him on to Caleb Sarong for the rest of the game. And Luke Ryan was then able to have an impact for Fremantle, as usual, with his intercept marking and his exceptional right foot kicking off half back. And it helped Fremantle work themselves back in the contest, because it was a bit of an arm wrestle in the way for that first half. And I think Hawthorn's entries going forward let them down, and Fremantle's revitalised game plan for the last month, which we saw after probably going into round 7 against Brisbane, where there was a lot of that handball change that they wanted to use to get out their back half, which ultimately backfiring on them. But what they'll be able to do for this small sample of games is to be able to follow a formula which they can at least replicate going into next season. But replicating is going to be the hardest part. It's doing it on a consistent basis, which will be most important for just the side overall going into next season to get correct, because there were always glimpses of their best football this season, but at different times it wavered, which ultimately cost them why they dropped from 5th on the ladder this season down to 14th in 2023.
Yep. Now, next game, mate. I said last week that you can put your house on the Gold Coast Suns. North Melbourne definitely wouldn't be winning this game. They want the number 1 pick. I'm now homeless. Probably can't see. I don't have a roof anymore under me. But yeah, now homeless after putting my house on the line last week. But well done to North Melbourne. Well done to Nick Larkey. I don't think you can... 9 goals, 3. I think he deserves that big haul. You know, he's been getting his 5s and 6s, but it's really nice to see Nick Larkey just pull in a 9. I would love to see him get 10, because kicking that many goals... I think it was 70 that he ended
71.
up with? 71 that he ended up with when your side lost 20 straight games. Goes to show you how good of a player you actually are.
I think it's more incredible considering the limited ball supply that he had going inside 50 from his teammates, Brody, to generate that amount of goals this season. And I think it was a very good stat that was pulled up as well. I think it was yesterday, actually. So it's the first time that 3 forwards have kicked 70 or more goals since 2009, which was Brendan Favola, Jonathan Brown, and Nick Rewalt. So that's 14 years between drinks for 3 players in a season to kick 70 or more goals. And we spoke at a time, right, not long ago in the AFL where goals were becoming very frugal. And there was a lot of emphasis on team defense. And, of course, there's still this structure of flooding the back line to make it extremely difficult for the attacking team to find a forward target. But teams are now balancing out the emphasis between attack and defence, and that's exactly what fans want, because, yes, at times seeing a combined 15 or 16 goal game is good, as long as there's an extreme amount of pressure, there's a lot of big physical hits, but we don't want to see every game for, 200 plus games during a home and away season, Brody, where it's only a combined 12 to 13 goals and it's just dour and it's sluggish and it's a real arm wrestle and there's no real clear clarity on teams taking that extra incentive of being dashing and daring and taking those risks through the corridor. It's a very even balance that we've got to get right. And I think this season and last season have seen a shifting of the guard, and the shifting of the guard has a lot to do with the 666 rule, which thank goodness the AFL decided to do that, because
best thing that they've done.
Best thing they've done in quite some time, because we don't want to see 5 or 6 ball ups exactly in the same spot. The umpire calling ball up, ball up, ball up.
Yeah.
Player gets tackled, ball up, ball up. We don't want to see that. We want to see a pretty wide open, expansive game where both teams are able to use their creative pursuits to be attacking at all times. And hopefully this is just the beginning of what we've seen for the last couple of seasons.
So just on that stat that you mentioned with the 3 forwards kicking over 70 goals, hasn't happened since 2009. Another interesting part that you can add to that is Carlton, Adelaide and North Melbourne are all in the bottom 7 teams for inside 50s. Believe it or not.
That's remarkable. I think early on this season I was looking at Carlton's inside 50 numbers and they were roughly around 50 to 51, which is normally the average anyway for an AFL side.
So Carlton were 12th, Adelaide were 13th, and North Melbourne were 17th. Surprisingly enough, Collingwood are 18th in inside 50s.
That's staggering.
That tells you exactly what the ball's like coming into your forward 50 from Collingwood.
I thought it was West Coast that were dead last in inside 50s. I think they were averaging about 43 and a half rather.
So they finished on 14th, so higher than Gold Coast, Hawthorn, North Melbourne and Collingwood.
That's staggering to think of that. And it's normally, of course, your efficiency of inside 50s that does determine a lot on whether teams bomb the ball high or lower their vision to spot up a target going in, moving forward. There's a whole predication of different areas, I think, that separates the exceptional sides that are able to go forward and the ones that just bomb the ball on top of their key forwards' heads and the ball falls to the ground and easily the opposition team repels from their back 50. There's just a numerous amount of elements that goes quite a long way to why teams are able to be so successful going forward. And marks inside 52 have a big play in it too. It does. Yeah. And Brisbane, I think, it was 33 against North Melbourne, which is a record in VFL AFL history back in round 5. And that was just absolute lambs to the slaughter that afternoon. And there was Sydney and West Coast too in round 15. The Swans, I think, took 29 marks inside 50, which I think is the second highest ever. So we saw teams take more marks inside 50, Brody, than what we've ever seen probably in years gone by. And I think that's a good thing too, because we don't want to see teams only taking 8, 9 marks inside 50s, and a lot of it has to be done at ground level for teams to conjure up their goals, and where, of course, congestion becomes very drastic in a way that becomes very, very narrow, and the congestion becomes even harder for teams to pinpoint their way through to goal.
Now, we'll move on to the next game. Brisbane 72 defeating St Kilda 60. Felt this one was a real solid hit out by both sides. Exactly what you want coming into finals. It was finals-like pressure. We know the way St Kilda play, typical Ross Lyon kind of game style. They'll squeeze you, that real team defensive pressure. But Brisbane ultimately, they got over the line, but St Kilda definitely didn't lose any supporters in this game here.
No, they didn't, Brody. And I think the first half was a real telltale story. I think Brisbane had about 34 inside 50s and St Kilda had only 15. And I think at that point, the game should have been over by half-time, because Brisbane kicked, I think it was 4 goals 11, St Kilda about 3 goals 3 at half-time. And majority of Brisbane's 15 scoring shots in their first half were gettable missed opportunities. So they didn't quite put St Kilda away when they needed to. And then the Saints came marching in that third quarter, 3 goals in about 3 goals in about, I think it was a 5-minute period there, and they really had their tails up, and then Brisbane were able to wrestle momentum back. And I think there was a debate there in the last minute and 28 where there was, I think, Jack Steele and Rowan Marshall and Jack Sinclair on the bench, and I think some people made a big fuss about it. And it's like, well, imagine if one of those players comes back onto the field and they get instantly injured, right? They do an ankle, they do a hamstring, they do a hand injury, or they do an AC joint. Let's take that for example.
Yeah.
Imagine the uproar there would be within the circles at St Kilda, that the media, some, not all, would say that, well, you're only 2 goals down. Why not bring 3 of your 4 best players back onto the field and give yourselves every shot? But at that stage, Brody, the Saints ultimately knew their fate, that they'll either go finish 6th and get a home elimination final, or finish 7th. Why just throw the towel in and say that, well, we're just going to bring them all back in for one final shot? You have to play with a level of precaution, especially when it comes to a final round, when you already know what your fate is as a side going into finals. So I had no issue there whatsoever with Ross Lyon resting 4 of his best players on the bench in that last minute and a half, although they still gave themselves every shot at a winning game. That's just my takeaway from that particular passage.
Yep. No, I think you hit the nail on the head there, Juri. And St Kilda can't win a final without Rowan Marshall or Jack Sinclair or Jack Steele. So you look at that, why would you risk it? Yep, you might have a chance of winning or kicking 2 quick goals in the last 90 seconds, but it's probably a 1 in 50 chance, let's be honest, at best, for that to happen. You're not going to gain much out of it. You're going to gain a lot more by having these players fit and ready in a week and a half's time. Now, we'll move on to the next one. Western Bulldogs 104 defeating Geelong 79. What a final game it was by Isaac Smith. He was running around with a smile on his face, but it's drawn the ire of a few Geelong supporters as well. I know there was a little bit of footage of him and Dangerfield sitting on the bench laughing in that third quarter when they're obviously getting pumped a little bit. And to see that, it's eyed a few Geelong supporters.
I think it's a bit ridiculous, right, Brody, for them to turn on one of their top recruits. I think that they've
two of their top recruits.
Yeah, 2 of their top recruits that they've had in club history. And it's ironic enough because they won the premiership last year and they're all celebrating and humming and oohing and ahhing and having a time in their lives. And yet we fast forward 12 months later and they tend to do that. And Geelong supporters are pretty mellow, Brody. They're pretty, pretty usually even killed. So that was a surprise to see that, because he was tremendous, and I think he had 36 disposals. I think he had roughly over 550 meters gained for the match. He was
He
just
had 800.
800. It was yeah, it's an absolute just ball magnet on the night, and Geelong really stuck firm, and the Bulldogs, of course, some of their kicking errors at times let them down, and they'll look really jittery with ball in hand. And it wasn't even until probably the first 5 minutes of the third quarter they instantly piled on 3 quick goals and got themselves back in lead, and then Geelong again refused to wilt and kept pretty close. And it wasn't even until the final quarter where, of course, with Marcus Bontempelli, Jamara Ugle-Hagan, Aaron Norton, Tim English, and the big one which has already been made mention of was the switch by shifting Tim English into the forward line and having Rory Lobb ruck in the second half, and it gave them a different dimension. I think it helped significantly with the Bulldogs' clearance game, and they were able to get on top as the second half gradually progressed. And I think this is the real conundrum for the Bulldogs going into this off-season, Brody, is that their CEO, Ahmed Baines, had already spoken on Melbourne radio that he'd already basically rated their list as a top 4 list going into this season. And I think, like many of us, had them vying for a top 4 position this season. I had them, I think, 4th on the ladder going into the season.
In mine.
Why did you believe that you had them finishing 10th, Brody? What were some of the reasons to justify?
I had their bottom half, and obviously being a Freo supporter, I think I looked at their forward line at the start of the year, and when you're going to have 4 big guys, it's not going to work. Everyone said, they had the preseason game, it worked once. Come an actual game, that's not going to work. It's the defenses now are too good in the AFL, and especially as they're a lot more team orientated. Where they get back, it's no longer that one-on-one game that you see. And then as soon as the ball hits the ground, it's not like the 80s or 90s where the ball gets hit or hits you on the chest. Ball hits the ground majority of the time. It's how good you are on the ground as a big man. And a lot of those guys they have in, like your Sam Darcy, your Norton, your Rory Lobb, they're great contested marks, not so good on the ground. And also, actually, and one of the things that's actually come to the fore now is their bottom 6 players. Their top 6 is some of the best in the AFL. Their bottom 6 probably wouldn't be getting a game for most sides. So that's what I looked at. But in saying that, I'm not going to brag too much because I also had Collingwood finishing 8th. So I can't brag too much with my predictions. Bulldogs, what a waste of a year, though. What a waste of a year.
It is pretty hard to comprehend what they dished up probably in the last 7 weeks, Brody, where ultimately the wheels fell off and they had their destiny in their hands. At one point, they were sitting 5th on the ladder after, I think it was about round 15 or 16, and it looked pretty rosy from there to really hit hard and hit home for a top 4 spot. And those losses to West Coast and Hawthorn really ultimately bit them on the back foot. And that's just, you can't take anyone lightly nowadays. And you couldn't have said that a decade or 2 ago, Brody, where you can almost pencil in the win before you even walk onto the field for the opening siren. It's not like that nowadays. You've got to be switched on. And that's where I think there was a bunch of errors along the way too, especially in our Hawthorn game we spoke about a fortnight ago, where that fatal error where they had Tim English kicking
kicking out from fullback.
Yeah, that makes no sense whatsoever. They need to have Tim English in the middle presenting as a marking option. That ball should have, as I mentioned before, should have been in the hands of either Bailey Williams or Bailey Dale, because they're arguably 2 of their most elite kicks in the side. To have them go straight down the corridor, look for either English to mark or knock it forward, and hopefully, say, Cody Waitman or Marcus Bontempelli or Tom Liberatore or Adam Treloar gets on the ball and surges it forward inside 50 and gives them that one final shot. But that's where I think those strategies that they didn't get right were really backbreakers in a way. And and the Giants game too, I forgot to mention, Brody, they had that game ultimately sealed at halftime. And of course, yes, halftime, the game isn't over. But down in Ballarat, where the conditions are extremely windy and blustery and goals are extremely hard to manufacture, they ultimately just stopped for that period alone in the third quarter where the Giants were able to wrestle back the momentum. They couldn't get the game back on their terms for the rest of the contest. And that's also another part where the Bulldogs, when they're not having the game on their favour, or in their favour, shall I say, is probably a real deficiency of theirs is be able to defend without the ball and be able to cover spots and be able to defend in terms of defensive transition has been extremely glaring for a good couple of seasons or two. And that's where I think during the pre-season where that's got to be a pretty clear emphasis if they want to, again, close the margin between not just being a top 8 side that's going to, say, make it to week 1, but a side that everyone knows they're capable of and making the top 4 in 2024, Brody.
Yeah, I agree completely there. Now, Adelaide 123 defeating West Coast 78. We won't touch much on this one. Tex definitely gave Charlie Curnow a bit of a run for his money. I said last week I'm putting money on him for 12. He kicked 9 goal 4 and about 2 or 3 out in the full. So the big fella was definitely trying for me, but Crows ultimately just too good in the end.
They were, Brody, and ultimately the amount of scoring shots they were able to generate, I think it was 17 goals, 21 on the last 12, 123.
Yeah,
when you have 38 scoring shots, you're going to win most games, and that ultimately came to the fore. And West Coast were gallant, right, for at least probably the first 3 quarters, you have to say. They really gave it their all. With Luke Shaw, he had an outstanding farewell game. So did Shannon Hearn. And Oscar Allen, I think, kicked 5 goals, if I'm not mistaken, on the night as well to finish with, I think, about 53 or 54 majors, which is a tremendous effort, considering we spoke about Nick Larkey kicking 71 goals in the side for North Melbourne, which only finished, second last on the ladder with 4 wins or 3 wins for the season. So there are a lot of positives to look at in the way too for West Coast and what they've already got there of Oscar Allen, who no doubt is one of the future captains in waiting and gave it his all week in, week out. We spoke about West Coast who, for all the season, had such limited inside 50 supply of only about 43 entries. So that is, again, a real credit to what he's done as well and see where they go from here. And I think Adelaide, this has been well documented, some of the close games which they ultimately fell short by, and they can use it as a real burning desire for motivation going into 2024, because now you look at what they've been building for the last 4 seasons, Brody, is next year finals is definitely on the radar, and they've got the age demographic of their list really cherry ripe to make a real assault on finals.
Yeah, I think the way the Crows play will also hold up in finals too. It's a high pressure game, which you've probably seen from St Kilda, and their list is probably 1 or 2 years ahead of where Crows is at, just in the age demographic. Now, Port Adelaide 94 defeating Richmond 64 Sunday. Now, this was anyone's game up till half-time, but Port's midfield of Rosie and Butters were just a difference, especially in that last half. Zach Butters really put a stamp on the game. Rosie kicking 1 goal 3, could have kicked more goals, and we've talked that's a difference all year with Port's midfield, and that's what's helping them win a lot of their games. They're getting goals from Horn Francis, they're getting goals from Butters, they're getting goals from Rosie. Nice to see Xavier Dersma stand up as well and play some real good footy.
Yeah, he's had an injury-interrupted season, Brody, as well. He injured I think it was his PCL, or I think his medial knee back in round 7 against St Kilda. Missed, I think it was about 8 weeks of footy.
Yep.
So it took him quite a while to get back into the swing of things. I think he returned for that round 16 game against Essendon, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
And he's slowly integrated himself back into the side as well. Of course, he's one of Port Adelaide's real X factors, Brody, what he's able to do when he goes up forward, what he provides on the wing. He's a link man. Yeah, he's a real link man, and the extra flexibility that Port Adelaide have across all departments of the field is what's going to make them extremely dangerous come the final series. And this is something to really look forward to when they do play Brisbane, and we'll speak more about next week in the second qualifying final, that the two teams, since that rivalry began in the early 2000s, Brody, there have been no punches sort of disallowed between the two teams. They always seem to go hammer and tongs when the sides played each other. And that's what I think I was really looking forward to, Brody, even probably a couple of weeks before we ultimately saw what the finals matchups were going to be. And I was really hoping it was going to be Brisbane-Port Adelaide. I was hoping for that 2 years ago when Brisbane and the Western Bulldogs playing that semi-final. I was sort of hoping the Lions would win so we could see a Port Adelaide-Brisbane prelim final and just revisit back to the early 2000s. But both sides basically play the same way too, Brody. They always look for territory right away. There's no real possessing of the ball. It's all helter-skelter right from the outset and really look to use their clearance game as a weapon. And we spoke about the last couple of episodes with Port Adelaide. It's not just the number of clearances they're able to generate. It's the lethal destruction of their clearance work that hurt sides. And it was on show against GWS only a couple of weeks ago, which the differential was about, I think, 6 or 7. Yep. But the differential fell about 14 or 15 because it was the damage they were able to do with Connor Rozee, with Zach Butters, with Jason Horne-Francis running through the middle unattended. It's those factors with Port Adelaide are going to make them so lethal come the finals. And it's a great test for them, and we'll talk more about it next week, where Brisbane haven't lost this season in about 11 tries at the Gabba. So it's the real test that awaits them.
Yeah, I think if Port Adelaide can break even in clearances, they're going to come out looking like they've won by a lot more. They get the clearances so clean. They flick that handball around. Butters and Rose, they just seem to know where each other are without even looking. It's like they're twins out there on the field. But we'll go on to the next game. Melbourne 77 defeating Sydney 56. I don't know about you, but I was watching this game. Wasn't really sure what to take out of it. Both sides couldn't really change in their position. But one thing I want to say, I reckon Errol Goulden's the sneaky long shot come Brownlow night. And Jack Viney is the heart and soul of the Melbourne Football Club.
You nailed that on the head too, Brody, with both Errol Goulden and Jack Viney. Jack Viney, ever since his first game, when he donned on the Melbourne jumper back in round 1, 2013 against Port Adelaide, he's been the real battering ram for what they do in the coalface. And I still remember, so the documentary at Melbourne released after their drought-breaking 57-year premiership, and he was talking about the dark days, especially in his first season that year, and they were heading back down the players' race. They were smacked by 148 points against Essendon in round 2. I think it was 184-36 that night, and I can recall extremely well because I was watching that game, and he basically asked one of his teammates when they got down to the change rooms, and the players, of course, were disconsolate. There were no words spoken. And I think there was one of his teammates was crying, and he turned around to the guy that was sitting next to him, and he said, "I didn't realise that the crowd was that loud." And unfortunately, the comment that he heard back was, that wasn't just the crowd that was being loud. That was the crowd that was heckling and booing us and giving it to us with profanities and tirades. That's the worst position you can be in as a footballer, to be given to that level of verbal abuse, but also at the same time to feel as though there's a lot of mental fragility when you head back down the tunnel, knowing that you've been completely obliterated to the worst extent possible. But what he has done, right, from the wilderness to being vice-captain, and he could have easily been captain when Melbourne made that leadership appointment during the 2019 off-season, because he already had leadership qualities as then an 18 turning 19-year-old in 2013, Brody. He was an already made leader of the Melbourne Football Club, even at that young age. And what he did on Sunday with some of his physical workers, we'd always come accustomed to with Jack Viney, is that he kept burrowing his head in. And particularly when there was that third quarter where Sydney got out to, I think it was about a 17-point lead, and the momentum was on their side. I think it was 7-12, 54 to 5-7, 37. And you're thinking at that stage, Sydney's probably going to run away with it. But he willed himself to every contest. And just from there, Christian Petrarca kicked that all-important goal. I think it was from 50 metres out, which cut the deficit back to 11 points with, I think it was about 6 or 7 minutes left in the third quarter. And that's where the momentum of the contest began to change. And Bailey Fritsch had an outstanding game, his first game back since round 16 against GWS. And he did send a scare through right in the camp in that marking contest. And he thought, the foot injury's probably re-aggravated again. He heads back down to the interchange bench to get his foot looked at. And they've been the real scare, because for the last month, Brody, Melbourne have been trying to find this figuring out of what their best forward structure is going to be looking like heading into finals. And
then Harry Petty popped up with 6 goals. Then unfortunately Harry Petty went down injured. So Melbourne just look a completely more dangerous side with Bailey Fritsch in there. Doesn't need, his 15 kicks to kick 5 goals. He needs 7 or 8 kicks to kick 5 goals. And I think with Melbourne, he just straightens them up. And Cozzy suddenly looks a lot more dangerous as well. when Bailey Fritsch is around, because there's a lot more balls coming to ground level. And then if Max Gawn was to rest up there for 2 or 3 minutes in a quarter, then suddenly Melbourne's forward line just looks scary, dangerous. So, Jack Viney, very similar to Tom Liberatore as well. He's the heart and soul of the Western Bulldogs. You see when Libba went out of Western Bulldogs, they were losing games they should have won by 10 goals. Same as Jack Viney. So the heart and soul players, the players who really get underneath the bottom of the pack, hand it out to the distributors, and then they deliver by full inside 50. So every side needs them.
Oh, and one more thing too, Brody. You mentioned about Sydney. That loss was costly because they cost themselves a home elimination final. They would have played St Kilda in the first week, or GWS. I was actually GWS, I'm pretty sure too. So that ultimately ended up, being the sort of the backbreaker in the way that they couldn't finish off their hard work, but they replicated for 3 quarters and ultimately went goalless in that final term, which was possibly the worst timing to be in because they, at that stage, had the destiny in full control to be able to play in a home elimination final. And we know, of course, over the years, Brody, at the SCG, when it comes to finals with the Sydney Swans, that the crowd of over 40,000 gets extremely loud and becomes a real cauldron there where teams, whoever might have been between St Kilda and GWS, had to visit there, and that's only just making a case scenario out of it. It's the smaller dimensions of the SCG compared to other venues that presents opposition sides a fair share of problems. And unfortunately, I think when Sydney, if they do lose in their elimination final next Friday night to Carlton, they'll probably look back and think, we just let one slip right in that final quarter against Melbourne where we ultimately had full control of that game and we weren't able to go on with the job. So that's only the what ifs, I think.
Yeah, but you also got to look at GWS up in Sydney. That's not even really a home final for me. So I look at that and I'd actually probably rather be playing Carlton than GWS up there because GWS have had the wood over them over the last few years, and I think we've seen that. But speaking of GWS, 105 defeating Carlton 73. They came out and they meant business on Saturday. Their big guns really come to play. Whitfield, Kelly, Canelio, Tom Green, Toby Green with 4 goals. Bye-bye Bulldogs. And, Carlton streaks over, Juri, unfortunately. Sorry to let you down about that. But how do you see both of these sides' chances come next weekend?
Well, I see both sides' prospects pretty high, Brody, for mine, with St Kilda and GWS at the MCG. And it's a real contrast of styles between the two sides where there are differences, and the Giants love to get back to their orange tsunami ways, which we've seen in spades this season. And that's their DNA, Brody, because they got players that are made for gut running on the outside, and they've got that perfect blend mix. Tom Green, since his return from a hamstring injury, hasn't missed a beat, and Stephen Canelio rightly, and I think he should make the All-Australian team when it's announced tonight, Brody. I spoke about in another podcast about only a couple of years ago where did we potentially see the last of vintage Stephen Canelio in full flight? Because there was that game against Geelong in the the semi-final, shall I say, the second week of the 2021 finals where he had no impact. He was almost though he was just labouring on grass. He only, I think, had about 14 touches that night. And I was watching and just monitoring around the field and I thought, how come hasn't Canelio's name been mentioned that often? And then you only had to look at the statistical disposal chart just to see the minimal impact that he had. I think he was carrying an injury too during the season, so that did limit his effectiveness, and perhaps even the captaincy that he had to carry on his shoulders probably did play a big part, because not everyone is assigned to be the captain and then to take on the dual responsibilities of having to perform on field every week and then take you on board, rocking up and facing press conferences where you've got to be an astute and resolute leader, even through the cold face of immense pressure and fire. But what he's has done since letting go of the captaincy is return back to the Stephen Canelio that Giant supporters know and that the AFL community well know, and with Cogs as well too. And this is probably going a long way back, Brody, is he already had those attributes in terms of been an extremely pressure performer, and this was going back to the 2010 Waffle Grand Final, Brody. He was a then 16-year-old. They were playing Claremont in the Grand Final, and he stood up under pressure. And even I think the week before, they were playing Perth in the prelim final. I think he kicked 4 goals or something.
Yeah.
And even at that youthful age, he already understood what it was like to take on the mantle as not only an on-field leader by not having the captaincy, but being able to lead by example on-field. And that's a full credit to what he has done to turn around what was from only a couple of seasons ago to now, where he's basically, again, he's always been a star midfielder of the game, but he's just gone to another level. And as for St Kilda, we've seen this season the defence has held up their back six as well. Callum Wilkie and with Dougal, Howard there, and Josh Battle, those three play such a pivotal role in their intercept marking game. Jack Sinclair, he can be relied upon week in, week out. You can throw him into midfield as Ross Lyon did in round 13 and win you the game off his own bat with 32 disposals and 7 clearances that night. Jack Steele, who's been just extremely consistent, and yeah, some people have spoken about at various points this season where he probably hasn't been the vintage Steele that we know, but he always delivers when the game counts upon. And we've seen Brad Crouch the last month, and you touched upon too a couple of episodes ago that he's returned back to his best. So they've got the season campaigners there, I think, Brody, on every facet to really make it a grinded out game and have it on their terms. And that's what's going to be most intriguing come next Saturday afternoon. And as for Carlton, I think they did put down the preservation and sort of maybe have probably cooled their jets down after what happened with Charlie Curnow ultimately winning the Coleman medal for a second straight year, and probably played caution to win to make sure that they didn't have any significant injuries coming out of the game. And although Blake Acres did get subbed out after, he was by far probably Carlton's best player.
Yes,
yeah, 21 disposals. I think it was 8 kicks and 13 handballs before he ultimately hurt his collarbone, and luckily scans have revealed that it's nothing serious and he should be available for next Friday's first elimination final against Sydney. So I think there was a lot of preservation what the Blues were doing, and again, they'll get Patrick Cripps back, they'll get Sam Doherty back, and whether Jordan Boyd returns to the side, I think that's one thing they've got to look at too, the Blues, bringing Boyd back into the team.
Yeah.
Just for not only his role as the small defender, but his role, he can provide an extra layer of run and carry from half-back, which I think most people didn't realise until this season gradually got by when he did earn his spot back in the 22, that he does have this extra element in his bow.
Yep. And what we'll do now, mate, we're going to go into the All-Australian team as well, which we're filming. For those of you who don't know, we're filming this and recording this on a Wednesday, so it'll be announced tonight, the All-Australian team. So we're doing this with no idea of who's going to be correct. I'm going to give out my team, and I know it's going to be wrong, but I'll be the one who look like an idiot. So I'm going to kick off my side, Juri, in a back pocket. Oh, so in both back pockets, I've got James Sicily and Jack Sinclair.
Spot on. That's two very good choices, Brody, and what Sicily was able to do. And he impacted most of Hawthorn's wins anyway. The St Kilda win in round 11 with the 43 disposals and still 16 marks they took that afternoon. His impact right throughout, not to just be that brick wall in Hawthorn's back six, but to also be damaging with his disposal by foot. And those are the combinations that have sort of elevated him into the elite category of intercept markers in the league. And Jack Sinclair's one is no surprise whatsoever, Brody. Right from the first game this season, and when St Kilda needed a lift, when they needed that spark, he always delivered, and delivered at the most pivotal moments in games.
Now, fullback, I've got his Saints teammate as well in Callum Wilkie. You scored the least amount of points per year. You just got to have Callum Wilkie in. Intercept machine as well. Beats his man one-on-one. Now, back flank, Nick Dacos, and I'm about to trigger every Collingwood supporter in the competition. Centre half back, Harris Andrews. Back flank, Dan Houston. Now, there's a reason why I haven't selected Darcy Moore. Darcy Moore, I've already got intercept markers. I don't need another intercept marker. I need someone who can play on the best centre half forward and beat him. I don't need another intercept marker. Darcy Moore one-on-one. We've seen Charlie Curnow get a hold of him. We saw Taylor Walker, I think, kick 5 goals in half a footy on him as well. So one-on-one, we know that's not Darcy Moore's strength, but I've already got an interceptor in James Sicily. I'm going with Harris Andrews, who I think is a little bit better one-on-one. If Sam Taylor made the squad, he'd be in there.
Yeah, I think also you touched upon Sam Taylor, Brody, that the only reason why he's not in the squad because he missed 2 months of footy with that hamstring injury. Yep. That comes into consideration why, even though when he did return in round 14 against Fremantle and stifled Jai Amos and stifled Mitch Lewis and stifled
everyone.
So many of everyone, all the other opposition key forwards in his return, that 8-week period there when he was on the sidelines ultimately cost him an All-Australian berth and, the initial All-Australian squad, should I say, of 44.
Yeah, so we'll get this on the socials as well, across all our socials. So on the wings, same as everyone else, Josh Dacos, Errol Goulden, they pick themselves. I don't think you can pick anyone else. Mason Wood, I think I had in there at the halfway mark, but then Errol Goulden's last half of the season was probably close to the best in the AFL for me, Juri.
Couldn't agree anymore, Brody. Every game, 30 or more disposals and over 550 metres gained. And I think the GWS game is one that, like many of Errol Goulden's outstanding performances this season, that stood out. I think it was 32 touches, kicked 2 crackerjack goals. He had about 773 metres gained or something. Yep. I think it was the Western Bulldogs game where he had over 750 metres gained and played such a key cog in that 2-point victory that night in round 18. And it's not only just the run and carry he provides and just runs all game and covers more than 12 kilometres, but it's his disposal with his deadly left foot, Brody. Yeah, that's the difference, right?
And you'd rather have 15 kicks from, I think we said this last week, 15 kicks from Errol Goulden than 25 kicks from Tim Taranto. Like, you look at the difference with Tim Taranto not making the squad, disposal efficiency, and I think his stats also get inflated a little bit with a lot of little soccers he does instead of picking the ball up. But now into the midfield, Ruck, Rowan Marshall. His last month, I think, has just taken the reign off Timmy English, but I might be able to squeeze him in somewhere else. Marcus Bontempelli, captain, centre. Rovering, Zach Butters and Jordan Dawson.
I have no disagreements with that whatsoever, Brody. Yeah, all perfectly select choices too. All 4 players have had tremendous seasons, and Rowan Marshall, particularly in that last 2 months, and he was able to impact the scoreboard when St Kilda needed just that extra spark. I think that North Melbourne game, I just want to speak upon that because they only kicked 4 goals to three-quarter time. It was 4 goals, 11:35, I think, that afternoon. It was in round 19, and they desperately needed just an extra coaching swing from Coach Ross Lyon. And he delivered it, and he put Rowan Marshall up forward. I think he kicked a goal in the first 2 minutes in the final quarter, and it led to the shifting of the contest, and ultimately St Kilda were able to find that momentum. And if he hadn't done that, we probably wouldn't be talking about whether St Kilda might have been in the finals picture. That, of course, is too hard to predicate, but that move played such a key part in just re-galvanising, I think, giving that extra bit of juice where they just needed a little bit more of a spark at that stage.
Now, centre-half forward, Tex Walker, I don't think you can argue with that, Christian Petracca and Connor Rosie.
No arguing disputes on that whatsoever, Brody. And Christian Petracca, when he did have to move forward and when Clayton Oliver did do his hamstring and, of course, had those multiple setbacks. And I think for Coach Simon Goodwin, it was a switch to just get that extra damaging forward because Petracca did play down his first, I think, 2 or 3 seasons before he did permanently move into a midfielder's role. It's a great selection again, and his damage as well up forward is second to none, and one that I think is very reminiscent of what Dustin Martin replicates for Richmond, having that big body forward up there. And I think going into the final series, that's the big part where it plays on Thursday night against Collingwood is how much time does he spend between in the midfield and up forward? That's the real intriguing debate.
Yep. Now, full forward, Charlie Curnow, can't go past him. Forward pocket, Nick Larkey. Other forward pocket, Toby Green, the vice captain.
I have no argument there. Again, Brody, too.
Wait till we get to the bench.
Three players. Okay. Yeah, we'll see what happens there. No, Toby Green, 60 goals for the first time in his career. He kicked a career high, and I think every week he just bobbed up when they needed to. The Giants game, I think, is a very telling story of the Giants when they needed that lift, and he came through, and I think he was it 4 goals in the third quarter, if I'm not mistaken, and ultimately swung the momentum of that contest. And I think people probably get a bit fixated on some of his past indiscretions and all that, whether he's changed as a person. But there was a very good piece that was written on, I think, Code by, I'm just trying to remember, Jeremy Cameron, that's right, his former teammate. He wrote a piece for them, and he was talking about Toby Green, the person off the field and as a teammate. And he basically had nothing but plaudits for him. He was highly raving of his character and what he's able to do. And he's sort of a quiet achiever, and he's very, I think he's very misunderstood as well on the field too. I think because he's so robust.
Country boy as well. Like he's grown up, and you hear the way he speaks. It's a little bit, and the way he comes across, it's not overly well spoken sometimes. It's just like, like he's from a farm. And I can relate to it because I speak very similar. You shorten some words, and might pop out a little bit of an F-bomb every now and then. But he does a lot for that club, not just on the field, but he's the first one at events promoting GWS, running sports clinics, running kids clinics as well. So I know Toby and Isaac Heaney have actually just joined together to create a new company as well, bringing football to schools up there in New South Wales, which is nice.
Yeah, he's a very robust character on field, Brody, and that's what his personality shines when it comes to crunch moments, and he's able to deliver. And that's where he's had probably this season only those couple of very minimal games. And Nick Newman in round 3 held him, I think, just 5 disposals that afternoon. And that was only one of 2 games that I can recall where he basically got blanketed. And apart from that, every game he got on top, or there was probably an opening half there where he didn't have his usual impact, and then he turned the game on its head. And that's what the superstars do. When the game isn't on their terms, they always look for ways to impact, whether it be a big bone-crunching tackle, whether it be a contested mark inside 50 and kicks the goal to really spur on the side to greater heights. And that's all the elements that he does, and I think he's deservingly worthy of making another All-Australian team, Brody.
Now we'll move on to the bench for the All-Australian team. Isaac Quaynor, Tim English, Tom Liberatore, and Charlie Cameron. So there's a lot of notable omissions in there and a lot of midfielders. So the reason I haven't picked 4 midfielders on the bench, like they're probably going to do tonight in the All-Australian team, is I look at this. Connor Rozee, Christian Petrarca, Jack Sinclair, Nick Dacos, all players that are starting on field who can run through the midfield. Now, by having an extra defender in Isaac Quaynor who could pop into the back lines, an extra ruck in Tim English, and I look at Tim English and then I say, who are the unlucky ones? Maybe like a Lachie Neale who didn't get selected, and I put Tim English up against Lachie Neale. And for me, I think Tim English has had a more impressive year personally than what Lachie Neale has. Tom Liberatore, the heart and soul, we saw when he went out of the Bulldogs, you saw how they went. And then Charlie Cameron, obviously, when you kick that many goals, he can stop in a forward pocket with a Nick Larkey or a Connor Rozee when he moves into the midfield. So it's a side that you can actually play with, not a side with 15 midfielders, Juri, and that's my reasoning.
No, you're spot on again, Brody, and that's where they've got to get this vital mix of having midfielders, back pocket players, halfbacks, forwards, key forwards, and small forwards. And I think that's where a lot of the commentary over the years has been very lopsided in midfielders' favour. And you've got to take into each position on the field into consideration, because it's got to be fair and balanced. You can't be so biased towards one position on the field. And it's like with the Brownlow medal, right? The Brownlow medal is always a midfielder's to win, because that's where everything concurs around. But as long as you can even the field between what the individual player has done in their respective position each season, well, during the season, shall I say, then that will go quite some way to determining whether they make the All-Australian. And what you've done there with the bench too, and that's also a perfect ingredient because the 4 players you mentioned there, Charlie Cameron kicked over another 50 goals, I think, for the 4th time in 5 seasons. And with Isaac Quainer, who arguably was one of the best and most improved halfbacks this season and hardly
one-on-one
ever...
beast.
Yeah, one-on-one too, and hardly ever got scored upon.
Yeah.
It makes for a fan-worthy argument / consideration to have him in the All-Australian team. And consistently every week too, Brody. It's not just once a month where he'll hold, say, a Charlie Cameron to 1 behind, or he'll hold, say, let's say maybe if he played on Sam Powell-Pepper and he only held him to, say, 2 behinds.
Yeah.
So it's every week he's done on a regular basis, and you absolutely spot on with those considerations off the bench. If those 4 players are named in the final All-Australian team this evening, that they all are deserving winners of being part of the All-Australian team.
Yeah, definitely. And I think we get so caught up, especially when you get Brownlow night. That's a midfielder's medal. Nearly the media association, that's a midfielder's medal. And I just really want to start giving credit to your really good forwards, your back pocketers who do a job week in, week out, who don't get the recognition that they deserve. And that's why Callum Wilkie, I think, one of the best one-on-one, same as Harris Andrews. Look at Brisbane as well. Nick Dacos, Dan Houston as well has to be in there for me. He's was actually one of my first selected. So, right, to finish off today, Juri, I've got a field 1, bench 1, and sack 1, and it's an absolute doozy. So 3 players who have actually been selected in the All-Australian team: Jack Sinclair, Connor Rozee, and Josh Dacos. Field 1, bench 1, sack 1.
Oh, no. Okay, I would field Jack Sinclair.
Yep.
That's my reasoning. All 3 of them are consistent, but I think he provides just that little bit more damage too, not just off cross half-back, across midfield we've talked about for the last couple of episodes, but his metres gained is I think on average about 500 to about 550 per game, which to do that every week and to cover the amount of territory he does on every single inch of blade of grass and to do it to such damaging effect, you can't go by Jack Sinclair to be the starter. And the second one was bench.
Yep.
Bench. Ooh. So it was either between Josh Dacos and Connor Rozee.
Yep.
I feel as though I'm going to have to go with Connor Rozee to bench. I think just when you look at the overall numbers, I think Rosee's impact to hit the scoreboard is a telling factor in the reason why. And plus, I think just that extra X factor, even though Josh Dacos has plenty of X factor, I think
it feels bad saying it, doesn't it?
It does. It feels like a deterrent, right, to be saying this, because it's just, you almost have to just blink a couple times and just think out and process who you're actually going to have and cut and bench. But I think what we've seen at crucial points this season, and plus Rozee doesn't only play on the wing, Brody, but he also is able to extract, inside and extract a number of clearances. So that's why I've got Rozee coming off the bench. And sadly, Josh Dacos, sorry, Josh, to cut. But
if you're listening, Josh.
sorry about that. But again, this is so hard, right? Because he also provides the same elements as what both Jack Sinclair and Connor Rozee provide. He can play off the wing, he can play off halfback, he can play through the midfield, he can win his own clearance, and when you need him for that mercurial snapshot, he'll do it. And even score involvements too. That's something I forgot to mention too. All 3 of those players always impact in terms of score involvements. They get more than 5 a game, and that's where it comes down to your elite players who can not only make your teammates play better, shall I say, but to furthermore have them impact the scoreboard, say, in the next 2 or 3 possessions down the chain. So
look, for me, I looked at this and I think I've changed my mind 5 times since I actually wrote it this morning. And for me, I actually had Connor Rozee number 1 just for his ability to impact the scoreboard. But that between him and Jack Sinclair, it's a flip of a coin. Jack Sinclair on the bench, and then unfortunately, see you later, Josh. You'll get picked up somewhere else, I'm sure. But it just doesn't feel right. I could have even done a harder one. I could have said Peter Dacos, Nick Dacos, Josh Dacos, and let you do that one, Juri. But maybe we'll do that next week.
Oh, that might be a bit of an Albert Einstein equals MC squared formula to figure.
Trying to work out on the blackboard how you can fit all three in to where field one, bench one, sack one.
Talk about defining physics right there. Needing to try and get it all. I think it's too early to determine, right? Because we'll have to wait probably the next 10 years to really determine and find out exactly more in terms of a sample size with Nick and Josh compared to their legendary father Peter to totally examine who's the number one from the crop.
And who can forget Dwayne Russell's call in Nick Dacos' first game when he said, "No, Peter Dacos might be the worst of all three," and he got laughed at, and he was only joking, and it might end up being correct.
I do still remember that commentary call when Geelong were playing Richmond down Cardinia Park late in 2017, and Motlop kicked that goal, and he's like, "Drain them in your honey, Mots."
I love Dwayne Russell as a commentator. He's a lot of people either love him or hate him. I love him. I reckon he's fantastic. And right, to finish off, I've got a quote from Ben Cousins. So we kicked the winning goal with 3 minutes to go. Unfortunately, they kicked one with 1 minute to go, so we lost. All right, cheers, guys.